Hello, I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP, and first and foremost, I'd like to say thank you for viewing this video and subsequently visiting my channel. Sorry. The topic of this video will be on creativity for INFJs. So what I first would like to say is that creativity is an aspect of the subconscious, and so I am going to use the MBTI stack system to talk about this in a relatively understandable way, but also I'm going to diverge from it and use also general facts from cognitive science and neuroscience. So with that said, let me begin. I think what would be most instrumental for INFJs to improve their capacity for creativity would be for them to explicitly try to enhance their capacity for logical reasoning and consumption of sensory experiences. INFJs are quick to be beholden to relationships and fidelity, and this is something that can hold them back because creativity is something that is far more risky. And INFJs do not like risk as much as they might be tempted to view it or vicariously entertain it or understand it. But the risk aspect of creativity is what they have to get a hold of. You have to be willing to be ashamed and to do things that other people would consider evil, wicked, or awful. It's the aspect of increasing what you might think is evil and sinful in you, and those things will bring you closer and closer to the apex of your creative abilities. It might sound strange, but it is the devil for yourself that you have to go towards in order to help unleash creativity within yourself. INFJs will sometimes do some risky things, but on most occasions they won't. And most occasions they're model citizens. And INFJs, some of the things that can get them in trouble with their creative experience is just their desire for soulmates or romantic fidelity. And I'm not saying that people should be just keen on playing the field and things like that, but it's true for this standpoint that if you don't explore every aspect of your existence, then you will not have the creative centers in yourself to draw from. And because, too, INFJs do not like chaos and they don't really like negative experiences. This is true for every person. We all try to move away from those things that we consider painful for ourselves. We lose some of that capacity for creativity because it's not always the case that you need to suffer endlessly as an artist, but it is the case that negative experiences will be just as much of an instrumentative factor that colors the lens of novel outreach as anything else will be. And so INFJs, because sometimes they do get a little carried away in their need to be social saviors, they can stifle their creativity in this way too. They are Machiavellian whenever necessary, and they are it's definitely the case that they can be more socially engineering. So many people will not know them well in a landscape, but they'll know them in a general setting. So they already may be feeling relatively estranged and alone, not with very many social companions that they feel rightly understand them. So they may be adverse to trying more of getting into the underbelly of whatever communities and societies that they're a part of. But I take this from Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky was Christian, but I believe Dostoevsky was an INFJ. But interestingly enough about Dostoevsky, even though he was Christian, he wound up in a Siberian concentration camp because he was a part of a political group, just associated with it. He wasn't actually a part of the attempt to turn a coup and start a revolution, but because he also wrote some unflattering things about the monarchy and the political state of it, and he's associated with his party, he got sent over to Serbia and was working in horrid conditions, and this led him to contract epilepsy, and he would go into epileptic shocks and seizures before he would write his great works, his great novels. And he wasn't really a novelist, he was more of a philosopher and a political pundit and journalist before he actually bothered to write a novel. And he didn't actually write his first short stories and novels until he was imprisoned and after being imprisoned. And whenever he came out of prison, it was a creative flood. Also, because Dostoevsky spent so much time in prison, and there are real criminals in prison, though Dostoevsky was not a real criminal, he began to understand criminal psyche, and he began to understand the negative aspects of human psyche that he took for granted. And it was also this time and point where he started to reconsider what Christianity was and what was relevant about Christianity from the standpoint that individual experience is something that gives faith and creates faith, and it's through the revelation of individual experience that God reveals himself in all that is possible to the world and phenomenology of the individual. And this is the source and fire within a community setting that leads Christianity to be that fulfilling metaphysical ontology that it could be in a person's life, though it's not supposed to be this thing of rationalism that's been flooded and usurped by Platonic and Aristotelian ideation that's even seriously still closely linked to Christianity right now in the West. Dostoevsky hated the fact that Christianity was rationalism and only thought that the only rationalism that belonged to Christianity was the Bible itself, but the experience of God and the religious experience is fundamentally irrational, and it is only the irrational that is sacred. And so it's this kind of radical stance that was in complete opposition to the Catholic Church that made Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, Crime and Punishment, you name it, Notes from the Underground, the House of the Dead, and Poor Folk. It's just, he wrote all of these things also because whenever he got out of prison, he started hanging out with really sketchy, seedy people. He would go to bars, he would do some pretty ridiculous things, but he wouldn't publicize these things necessarily. So one of the things that INFJs might do is they might try these seedy or shady things just to communicate and share them with people. So they hear that somebody's into burlesque and they'll think, oh, that's kind of risky and edgy, and something like that appeals to their senses. And there's enough people approving of this and doing this, so I think I want to do it too, or in something like that. And they'll make it sort of a community deal, or they will be more comfortable with having friends or a friend that's already doing this or that. Now, it's not the case that INFJs aren't private and do many, many things that the world has no idea about that are relatively dangerous and crazy and things like that, but it's usually the case that INFJs don't go to the full extent of the danger and crazy that they could go to until they have something happen to them, or until they've been pushed in some way, which I don't think that that's at least what happened to Jung. It's what happened for people who suspect they're INFJs. It happened to Jung, it happened to Dostoevsky, it happened to Baruch Spinoza. Spinoza is a little more interesting if you consider him an INFJ, because Spinoza was a dissenter from the beginning of his life, and he basically got pushed out of his community because he was just always meddling with theological things and trying to understand things from an absolute logic-based standpoint. He's part of the crowd that Dostoevsky doesn't like, that turned so Spinoza actually didn't do much fault to Christianity from the standpoint of the doxology and the theology of Christianity. Dostoevsky was more concerned with being a Christian than he was concerned with people's need to create different metaphysical realities, though he thought that that was silly too. Dostoevsky's biggest opponent was the church, which is why he's kind of controversial in certain circles. Though, I mean, most people don't read Dostoevsky, so they don't know. But Dostoevsky is very much so controversial because Dostoevsky was anti-institutional Christianity and anti-Catholicism, though he was Greek Orthodox, and that's what he identified with. So I guess all of that is to say that, look, danger is what you have to go towards if you're being a creative person. It's not exactly... To be creative, you have to be comfortable with anxiety and ambiguity. And anxiety and ambiguity are most prevalent in dangerous situations. Now, danger doesn't mean necessarily that, you're going out and moonlighting as a prostitute, but you may have some interesting stories to tell after that experience. And danger doesn't necessarily mean that you are infiltrating the mob and trying to steal from them, though if you pull that off at the same time, you will have something interesting to say. You will have a set of experiences that you've collected up that are really unique, and that's where true originality comes from. You can't be original by doing what most or other people do, which is why getting close to your seat of danger is important. Because there will be people who live around your seat of danger, so there will be people who that is their norm, but because it's not your norm and you're going to it volitionally or being pushed towards it, you will have a different set of eyes and emotions for that experience that will possibly, especially if you're somewhat articulate, express that landscape and the aspects that go along with the phenomenology of that landscape and logical consistencies and aspects of reality that people may overlook in a way that they can't. Nobody probably is going to be able to tell a story about the mob the way in which somebody who's a psychologist, not related to the mob, but happens to be there witnessing everything that goes on. Mobsters will tell their stories, and the police will tell their stories, or news anchors, or crime people, but it's not until you get somebody who's read a bunch of plays and literature and things like that, and they just happen to be around a mob for some time in philosophy and psychology, and they observe it, but not criminal psychology or anything like that. They're these romantic generalists and everything like that. They observe the mob. You better believe that there is going to be something creative about the mob coming out from that person, because they're the wrong person in the right place. That's basically what inspiration comes from. It's a very underlooked, it's an underlooked source, so it's underrated. It's undermined and underrated because people hate to be scared. People hate to be terrified. People hate anxiety. People hate ambiguity. People hate to do things that seem to really make them cringe. But if you're not willing to cringe, and it depends on how creative you want to be. But there should be a slight cringe factor in everything you do. There kind of has to be like I don't know about this, but I'm going to try, I'm going to go for it. It's like that always has to, almost everything I do is almost like, I don't know. And I can tell you as an INTP, I deal with a lot of anxiety when it comes to doing many of the things that I do. Being in front of a camera, doing almost half of the things that I've done in my life has always been like I don't know about this kind of experience for me. But since I'm always used to this, I don't know, or I'm not sure about that, or maybe I just go for it anyways, because I've been on that side of where it's like, I don't know what's about to happen. I don't know if I'm necessarily going to like what's going to happen. And chances are there's probably some bits of this I don't like. I actually make it a point to go through with experiences I don't like very much, more often than not, and I don't discredit an experience just because I didn't like it. I just try to understand it, what was going on in it. And then I ask people who tend to enjoy those experiences or localize themselves around those experiences, what do they think of them and why do they like them in the first place, and then cross-reference and compare. And it's how I get a lot of information. It's how I can depict psychology. It's how I can write stories. It's how I know how to say certain things in songs. It's how I know how to say things in poems. I mean, it is a lot of reading and everything like that, but me being a creative person is also just as much in step in line with the fact that I'm bohemian as hell. And bohemian as hell means that I go along with the danger. Now, I'm not just basing it off of myself or anything like that, but what I am saying is that for each type, it's why I turn to the sensual aspect of the world for INFJs, because they get a little funny on that. I'm not saying you should develop a meth addiction or something like that, or go get hopped up on speed or something like that. But I think you should definitely deal with what you think is bad, what's wrong. Get in touch with it very, 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 very clearly. I mean, this has something to do with your shadow, and one of the things that Jung says about your shadow is that it's extremely generative in terms of the energy it can provide, your psyche, and the libido in your life. And whenever you want to think about creativity from, I guess, a general psychoanalytic standpoint, you're talking about energy and libido flow. And it's that generative energy and libido flow that leads to creativity. Creativity is definitely a risk thing. It doesn't always guarantee that you get something new, but it's a lot like a threshold sort of deal. So you may have a traumatic experience. You may do something risky and scary or something like that. You don't know really what to think about it. You don't know how to process it. You do another thing that's like that. You got nothing. You do another thing like that. You got nothing. You do another thing like that. You got nothing. You do another thing like that. You got nothing. Then you turn to your hermetical side and go sit in nature, which is the other aspect of it. So INFJs are definitely people who are okay with being loners, but INFJs too have a tendency really to be a little cowardice when it comes to human relation. And INFJs do not like to be alone. So, and I don't mean that from a standpoint that INFJs don't like solitude. INFJs do not like the idea of not being romantically fulfilled at some point in time in their life. They don't like the idea of not having people that they love and they care about in their lives. That's not a safe space for them. They don't like that. And it's why they don't like to be rejected. Though they get rejected and things like that, it usually has to do with things that they can't quite control. They're weird or something like that. It's just not the situation that they would pick. If the INFJs could pick the way in which the world responded to them, it would be the case that they got along with everybody whenever it was reasonable, and that most people were generally amicable and fair to them. That's basically how I'd put it. But that's just not the life that they're going to experience. But what you're going to notice with that narrative is the fact that they don't necessarily mind having conflict with people or anything, because it's like if it's about being fair. But it's also the case too that they don't want to be outcasts. They don't like to be ostracized or anything like that. It's why Plato has the metaphor of the cave, because for Plato, the experience of being outside of society whenever he was trying to be a part of it really cemented certain ideas in his head, because Plato basically went so far that he couldn't turn back. And I think for INFJs, you have to have some things in your life where it's the case that you go so far that you can't turn back. You have no idea where it's going to take you. You have no idea what it's going to do to you. I'm not saying your life should be Breaking Bad, but you should definitely have little microcosms of Breaking Bad going on in your life, because that is a seed and source of your creativity to from a certain extent. It's not the case that positive emotions and positive experiences don't mean things to creativity, because it's definitely realizing something's beautiful. It's definitely realizing what gives pure exuberance and joy, and what makes you all aspire and wonder about things that make you also do prolific things. But from the standpoint of what drives novelty, it's actually not really the things that people, because I mean, I guess to put it like this, we've had love for a long time, we've had happiness for God knows how long. Countless philosophers and so on and so forth have written about these things or whatever, If you think that you need to pull more of your life, more into your life of what other people are talking about and other people want, that's just not where creativity lives. I'm not saying you have to torture yourself or anything like that, but you have to live dangerously. As Friedrich Nietzsche put it, you must live dangerously. And that's why I think when it comes to you, logic is going to be important, but logic in debate and discourse, not logic just to yourself. You have to argue with people, and you have to disagree with them face to face with people and be contrarian and contentious. You have to wake it up, because that thing, that voice in you that's critical and is already critical about other people and the things that happen in society and the world, it has to be voiced and articulated in not always the appealing scheme that you may want to do. You like to win people over, but you need to kill some people in a social landscape. And I mean, that may not sound appealing to you, but wake up the hunter or the huntress in you. Know that you need to practice marking individuals for their arguments and shooting them down, because part of the reason why I do that as an INTP is because it helps me with my own thinking, it helps me with my own thoughts. If you're not really willing to kill another person's ideas, you can't kill your own. I kill my own ideas all the time. I kill other people's ideas. I kill ideas. It's because I kill ideas, other ones grow. You have to have some sword to you. And I notice that with INFJs, they tend to skimp on developing and sharpening that sword. And I'd say you need to do it. You can't be so agreeable. Agreeability and creativity don't go hand in hand. That doesn't mean that, you and INFJs are sensible people, so they'll understand this. That doesn't mean that you just deny who you are, because it's not that you're denying who you are to be these things. What you're doing is unleashing who you are, and you're these things. You just are afraid of the fact that you're these things, and other people don't like them. That's why you don't do them. But I know you flip the bird to somebody and everything like that at times when you get frustrated enough, because all humans are a certain kind of animal, and we all have it in ourselves and everything like that. But if you could play a countercultural dissenting agent for, certain stanzas, and do things that you really think are risky, like you really think this will get you in trouble, and you really wouldn't want to tell another person what you just did. You really wouldn't want to tell another person what you just watched or looked at or anything like that. It's the case whenever, because sometimes I've noticed with INFJs too, ENFJs are more guilty of this. They will have experiences just because they want to share those experiences with other people. And it's like, whenever you're doing this, you have to say damned and to hell with other people. You cannot consider other people whatsoever when you're being creative. Maybe you can consider people from the standpoint that you're analyzing them or something like that. But creativity is from the seat of I. It's from the seat of I. And when it comes to INFJs, sometimes the only I that they're in contact with is their ideational I. It's not really the I of the horrid stuff. I mean, they know they have... So there's a lot of INFJs, because I think of what MBTI writes about INFJs and things like that. They think that they're saints or something like that. They are saints, but I'll put it like this. Like, the reason why INFJs are saints is because they have devils. So every saint knows their devil. That's the way I'd put it. And INFJs have very, 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 very deep devils. Just as much as their metaphysical, social, everything, just as much as they're very shining, wonderful people, there is a very, 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 very serious, lively devil living inside of them that they don't like and they don't want to get to know. But I can tell you that if you are an INFJ, then you must get in touch with that devil. Everybody's devil is different, but I use the expression devil for INFJs because they may not like that. What grates you, what bothers you, what makes you cringe, that's more where you're going to find the source for whatever it is you need to do or want to do. Your type in particular, because, well, you're a little agreeable and you're a little adverse to chaos and you don't like danger necessarily unless it's permissible under certain settings. So INFJs will go rock climbing and things like that, and they'll do plenty of like adventure, some things and everything like that in their game. They'll schedule it and everything like that. But I dare you just to quit a job. I dare you just. I dare you just to quit a job. I dare you to just stop talking to a group of people for just suddenly without warning or anything like that. I dare you to do things like that where they seem like things more a teenager would do, and people would criticize. And the reason why I say teenagers is because INFJs pride themselves in their maturity. Even though they're goofy, INFJs are definitely goofy. They tell jokes and they like to have fun and they act like big kids and stuff like that. But if you get down to where they feel their like little social moxie and gumption, it's like, here I am, this individual who can reason and be steadfast, understanding, reliable, and fair. And it's like, sometimes those things get in the goddamn way, in your own way, and you can't want to be good. Or at least like this, you have to be beyond good and evil. I'll put it like that. Because what lives inside of you is not exactly, I mean, like, I know so INFJs have definitely, they like sex and things like that, but also they can be a little prudish at times and everything like that. I'm not saying go have like an orgy or menage a trois or something like that just cause, but I'm not saying that. I'm not saying, if you want to do something like that, if it's ever gone across your mind or something like that, you should do it. If it's never gone across your mind, then you should ask yourself why it hasn't and see if you've just been lying to yourself about something. Because let's get to the other part of this. You have to be honest with yourself, always. So sometimes we don't consider things about ourselves, and sometimes we don't ask ourselves questions because we're uncomfortable with the potential conclusions of those things. I'll also give myself as an example. I have emotions. I never liked knowing I had emotions. I never wanted to believe I had emotions. I have very, 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 very strong emotions. I don't always feel them though. That's the truth. My emotions are not within my conscious level of awareness. They're not. They're only within my conscious level of awareness whenever I use LSD or when I'm high or whenever I get depressed, which is a thing that can happen with ADHD. But in terms of my emotions, they're usually regular or I am depressed or I get depressed. And there are certain things that come with depression, but that's usually the deal. Those are about the only things that I experience. And when it comes to getting depressed, it's something that's normative for me. So I'm used to experiencing, so it's not out of the ordinary. Whenever I get angry, that's out of the ordinary. Whenever I'm extremely elated, that's out of the ordinary. Whenever I'm extremely excited or something like that. Now, I definitely get amused and certain things like that, but very, very compelling, strong emotions, which is why it was hard for me to accept that I am actually a very promiscuous and sexually interested creature, because I didn't actually like experiencing arousal in the first place, because that's hard for me to square away. At least that was hard for me to square away with the images of myself that I constructed based off of my childhood Christianity and the idea that I was a rational person and that it makes sense to be a rational person and that basically good people are rational people, so that's why I'm a rational person, and so on and so forth. I wanted to be a rational person. I don't, now you're talking to somebody who knows that it's not, no human being is rational, but I didn't come to understand that no human being is rational by believing the bullshit that I told myself. And there's bullshit that everybody tells themselves. I don't actually believe the bullshit that I tell myself. Even if I believe some bullshit about myself right now, that bullshit will be gone maybe 2 or 3 months from now. Because it's just, well, I'm creative. And It's the case that, you know, a lot of being creative has a lot to do with yourself. It doesn't have much to do with the world, which is interesting because many people in the world value creative production and things like that. But being creative as an individual has less and less and less to do with other people. Even when you're in a collaborative space, collaborative spaces only work well when there are different sources of ideation and light emanating from various figures in the room. You have to have multiple light sources that want to come together to make a very big beam of light that they would not do by themselves. But if you have a freaking dull bulb, then it doesn't matter. You know, you have to have something going on inside of you. You have to have some light, some substance in order to be creative in any situation. And that substance, I mean, know what you can handle and know what you can't handle. But I'd also say this: be willing to adapt to certain things and be willing to allow your freak flag to fly. That is certainly going to be difficult for you, um, in certain ways. In certain ways, it's not going to be. But don't do what's easy. Just don't do what's easy, or you're just wasting your own time. So, yeah, that's on INFJs and creativity, or how for INFJs to be more creative. I don't know how people are going to respond to this, and I don't know what they're going to think. And maybe it's the case that people may want more examples of what I mean, but I can't go into it specifically because I'm not an INFJ. But I think, given my presentation, that an INFJ will know what I mean. Like, I think they'll know. And I think they can figure it out. I can't tell you step by step what to do, but there you go. That's what it is. There's a path. Like, trust me, there's a true freaking path hidden in a dark corner of your mind that you're just like, but you need to go, yes, take the hand and turn the face towards it, because it's just like, that's where it lives. That's where it always lives. That's where it always lives for any individual. That's where it always lives. And for you, my agreeable, not so chaos liking friend, you got some things to do with yourself. So that's my video. Thank you for watching.